Go ahead bearing with us with our technical issues as we are figuring those out. My name is Sophia Esposito, and I am a college-age intern with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. We are welcoming you today to the Executive Intern Summer Symposium on Environmental Injustice. We first would just like to go over the run of order. So we first will take our time to introduce our panelists. We have 4 panelists with us here today who are experts in their areas and very talented and are here to contribute their profession and their knowledge with us regarding environmental justice. We will then give our presentation, which is a quick introduction into what environmental injustice is, as well as the history of it in the United States and how it nationalized throughout the country. We will then go on and see presentations from each of our panelists, which they have prepared to discuss their background, their knowledge, and their area of expertise, and how it correlates to environmental justice. Finally, we are going to open up the symposium to a question and answer discussion, which we will facilitate. We first have a few questions to ask the panelists, and then we would like to open up the questions to you as the viewers and the audience, and to give you all the opportunity to ask any questions that may arise throughout the symposium, throughout our presentation or the panelist presentation. So thank you for joining. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope that you all have a great experience learning about environmental justice in the state of Connecticut.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shri, and I'm an executive high school intern with the CHRO. I have the great pleasure of introducing our Deputy Director, Attorney Cheryl Sharp, and our Executive Director, Attorney Tanya Hughes, who will say a few words about the CHRO and a few words about the symposium. So thank you so much both for being here. We'll start with you, Attorney Sharp, and then go to Attorney Hughes.
Good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful day for a symposium about environmental justice. It's such an important civil rights issue that I think that we don't focus on enough. So we are so grateful to our executive high school and college interns who are ranging from the age of 14 to about maybe 22 or 3 years old, for putting this together. This is their first real big project. And so we are so happy that they were able to get panelists together, send out the evites and invites, and call all of these individuals together who are experts in their field, who have so much knowledge about environmental justice. And they're here with us today. So I just wanted to say a personal thank you to all of the executive interns who work so well together as a team and independently as well to bring us this important civil rights topic and this important information. My hat goes off to all of you. And again, I am so proud. Go Team CHRO, go Team Sharp. And now you'll hear a few words from our talented Executive Director, Attorney Tanya Hughes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you here, and I'm even more delighted that we have over 115 people in the audience for this phenomenal presentation. The interns have put together a very exciting topic, environmental injustice in the state of Connecticut, and we have expert panelists who are going to bring forth their expertise as developed by our interns under the tutelage of our Deputy Director, Cheryl Sharp, Anna Mitchell, and our legal team. And I'm just so excited. Some of our students here are former KCA students who have been with us for a number of years. And I'm extremely proud of the work that's being produced by these interns. They've done a great job arranging this presentation, putting together the panelists, researching the topic, and organizing this webinar on their own. And so you'll see for yourself what a great job they've done. Kudos to all of you. I'm proud of you. I believe that we're in very good good hands with our future. So hold tight on and enjoy this presentation.
Thank you very much for your kind words. We are now going to move on to the introduction of each of our panelists. Thank you for joining us today, and we are very excited for your participation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ada LaConte, and I'm a high school intern with the CHRO. I'm so excited to be introducing our first panelist, attorney Kimberly Jacobson. Kimberly is the Managing Director and Commission Attorney and Employment Matters at the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. She manages attorneys, investigators, and support staff. Additionally, she serves as a resource for the agency's regional offices and is involved in the preparation of the agency's legislative proposals. She has a special interest in housing discrimination, breastfeeding rights, disability law, and mediation. In recent years, Kimberly has been speaking publicly about living well with Parkinson's disease in many different forums and has written an article for the Connecticut Lawyers magazine titled, "My Disability Makes Me a Better Lawyer." Thank you so much for joining us, Attorney Jacobson.
Hi, my name is Ziva Haviland, and I'm a high school intern with the CHRO, and I have the honor of introducing Commissioner Edith Pastana. So Commissioner Edith Pastana received a Master of Public Health from Yale Medical School and a bachelor's, and Master's of Science in Biology from Rutgers University. In 1990, she began working as an epidemiologist for the Connecticut Department of Public Health, performing exposure assessments on Superfund sites. Since 1994, she's been with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection as the first administrator of the Environmental Justice. At CTD, she was responsible for the oldest continuous environmental justice program in the country, including the program's design, development, and implementation. She has served on numerous advisory boards and commissions, including but not limited to the U.S. EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, the Connecticut Housing Code Task Force, Preservation Connecticut, the Native American Heritage Advisory Council, the City of Hartford Advisory Council for the Environment, and the Connecticut Forests and Parks Justice, Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Council. She is currently working with Yukon Circa on the development of the CT Environmental Justice Screen Mapping Tool. She has received numerous awards, including the Public Service Award from the Secretary of State, the Hartford Environmental Justice Network Government Leadership Award, the CT Department of Environmental Protection Distinguished Service Award, and was placed on Public Service Honor Roll by the Association of Yale Alumni in Public Health for a career-serving social mission of public health. Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner Edith Pastana.
CHRO. I've had a great pleasure. Our thoughts as there is the founding executive communities and representation. Leverages into real and set for all. Oh, okay. I think I'm back. Am I back? Okay. Sorry about that. So central to this work is ensuring that families relying on government housing support. I'm going to start. Aaron Dog.
Hello. We're so sorry about that.
Wait. Okay. Am I audible? Okay. Aaron Boggs Esquire is the founding executive director of Open Communities Alliance, a Connecticut-based civil rights organization dedicated to confronting residential segregation and its impact. OCA leverages coalition building, education, and outreach, and litigation to realize the goals of the Fair Housing Act with a particular focus on equitable zoning and geographical balance in the location of government housing subsidy investments. Central to this work is ensuring that families relying on government housing support have access to areas that are healthy, safe, and set the stage for all children to reach their promise. OCA has been involved in a number of cases affecting national housing policies, including OCA v. HUD, which reestablished small area fair market rents in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, OCA v. Carson, challenging the rollback of the disparate impact rule, and Center for Leadership and Justice v. HUD, addressing the right of relocating project-based rental assistance tenants to have genuine choices in where they live. In 2022, OCA launched Growing Together CT, a coalition effort to promote housing choice in areas without affordability and investments in under-resourced communities. Ms. Boggs is a source for media on affordable housing, land use, and racial segregation, and has contributed to publications such as the American Bar Association's Journal of Affordable Housing and Economic Development Law, the Furman Center at NYU's Slow Debate on Affordable Housing and Segregation, and Housing Policy Debate. Prior to launching OCA, Ms. Boggs focused on a range of fair housing policy issues at the CT Fair Housing Center and the CT ACLU. She is a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center, Wesleyan University, and the DC Public Schools. Thank you again so much to Ms. Boggs for joining us today.
My name is Paul Bisbord. I'm a graduate of Wheaton College in Massachusetts, and I have the pleasure of introducing Thomas Bontley. Thomas Bontley is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Connecticut, serving also as director of the Environmental Studies program. He received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin, where he wrote a dissertation on psychological explanation. At UConn, he teaches courses on ethics, environmental ethics, and philosophy of science, and serves as faculty advisor to several social justice-themed student groups. He has published on a wide variety of philosophical issues and is currently working on a book on the ethics of the climate crisis. Tom is also a founding member of a new environmental justice research center at UConn, the Collaboratory for Just Innovation and Climate Equity, also known as Just ICE. As the climate crisis deepens, the United Nations has called for countries to, quote, transition away from fossil fuels and energy systems in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. All too often, however, rapid economic and technological changes are seen to benefit only a small elite while leaving already underserved communities behind. While working with local communities and a global network of scholars and activists, UConn's Just ICE Collaboratory aims to advance research and scholarship in support of a just and sustainable transition. Outside of his academic work, Tom has long been active in the labor movement. Among other roles, he served 4 terms as president of UConn AAUP, the union representing UConn's 400 academic professionals in collective bargaining.
Hello, my name is Kriti Jal Durgam, and I am a high school executive intern with the CHRO from Farmington, Connecticut. So let's begin by first off defining what is environmental injustice. As defined by the EPA, environmental justice means the just treatment and meaning for involvement of all people regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability in agency decision-making and other federal activities that affect human health and the environment. This includes the full protection from disproportionate and adverse human health and environmental effects and hazards, including those related to climate change, the cumulative impacts of environment and other burdens, and the legacy of racism or other structural or systemic barriers. Equitable access to a healthy, sustainable, and resilient environment in which to live, play, grow, work, worship, and engage in other cultural practices. So just to define environmental injustice is the unjust treatment and meaningful involvement of all people on the basis of the said factors. Thank you.
Now that we know what environmental justice is, we are going to talk about the beginning of environmental justice in the United States. We will discuss the cases that first originated over 40 years ago that nationalized attention in the US regarding environmental justice and the disproportionate impact on marginalized communities. So the first case occurred in East Houston, Texas in 1979, when residents of the community alleged that the decision to place a garbage dump was racially motivated in a violation of civil rights under the 1983 Civil Rights Act. When this was investigated by the district court in B v. Southwestern West Management, it was found that the placement of the dump would irreparably harm the community. Despite this discovery, the court determined that there was still insufficient evidence to prove intentional discrimination in the fact the garbage dump was intentionally chosen to be placed in this community because of its race makeup. Despite the fact the case did not have a positive outcome, it emphasized the need for data collection so that communities could challenge environmental decisions in the future with tangible statistical evidence or data. The second case that was extremely important in the development of environmental justice in the United States occurred in Afton, North Carolina in 1982 in Warren County. In 1982, there was a decision to place a highly toxic PCB landfill, which was protested by African American community members. These individuals argued that the community was selected because it was predominantly minority and low-income individuals resided in it. For example, the community was 84% African American and was one of the poorest areas in North Carolina. The case concluded that the PCB landfill site was not scientifically the most suitable site because it caused a higher risk of groundwater contamination. Therefore, based on this conclusion, it was determined that it was likely this decision was impacted because the decision to place the PCB landfill was impacted because of the minority makeup. This case was also influential because it was the first instance of the term environmental racism or environmental justice being used. So after these protests and these situations, research was initiated to focus on the distribution of environmental risk in the US and how these environmental risks disproportionately impact certain groups. For instance, there was a 1987 study conducted by the Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ called the Study on Toxic Waste and Race in the United States, a national report on the racial and socioeconomic characteristics of communities with hazardous waste sites. This study determined that race and ethnicity were the most significant factors in deciding where to place environmental hazards, such as the garbage dump in East Houston, Texas, or the PCB landfill in Afton, North Carolina. Therefore, following these cases, the idea of environmental justice was nationalized across the United States, and the idea of providing an equal environment in its safety and its health was nationalized as well, as it was proven there was areas that were being disproportionately impacted by environmental injustice and groups of people being disproportionately impacted as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Taylor Fitzgerald, and I'm a college intern at the CHRO. I will be giving a few examples of environmental injustice. Historically, marginalized groups such as low-income or communities of color are disproportionately affected by pollution and adverse conditions caused by climate change. To begin, lack of clean water access is a prevalent issue in many communities. Typically, clean water is distributed to wealthier areas than marginalized communities. Flint, Michigan, for an example, is predominantly African American communities, which was affected by polluted water supply from the Flint River. Over 100,000 residents were exposed to high levels of lead in drinking water, and lead exposure can result in behavioral problems and learning disabilities. Air quality disparities is a second example of environmental injustice. Industrial areas typically have greater exposure to pollutants, causing poor air quality and health issues. Cancer Alley is an area in Louisiana with 150 oil refineries and petrochemical plants that increase the average of some cancers. This area is predominantly African American communities, therefore putting them at a greater risk of respiratory issues such as asthma. Lastly, climate change exposure disproportionately impacts marginalized communities with an increase of heat waves or floods, for example. This is due to inadequate housing, financial insecurity, and less access to healthcare compared to white affluent communities.
We are now going to move over to the fun part of the symposium and hearing from our 4 panelists and hearing their area of expertise and how it was related to environmental justice and their contributions to the topic. Thank you very much again to our 4 panelists for joining us today and providing your knowledge with everyone. We first would like to hear from Attorney Kimberly Jacobson from the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities.
Hi, I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a second.
Great, we can see it. Thank you so much.
Great. Hold on 1 minute. I'm just getting myself situated. Oh, here we go. Okay, well, as long as you can see it. So my name is Kim Jacobson. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon, and I think the interns have picked a great topic to talk about. I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about what we do at the CHRO and how that intersects with environmental injustice areas. And then we have an expert panel that will surely give you even more information about the subject matter. So let's see. So our mission is to eliminate discrimination through civil and human rights law enforcement and to establish equal opportunity and justice for all persons throughout the state through advocacy and education. So we do quite a number of things. One thing that we do is investigate and prosecute discrimination complaints. And I'm going to kind of put that aside and talk about that a little bit more in a second. Other things we do are education and outreach, and which is what we're doing today, sharing our knowledge with you, sharing our knowledge with the public about these type of laws. We also do affirmative action plans. We review state affirmative action plans, and we also do contract compliance to make sure that minority businesses get their fair share of state money when we're doing contracting. So I'm going to primarily talk about discrimination complaints today. So what kind of discrimination complaints do we handle? Well, they have to be based on a protected class. And we have like 27 protected classes, or maybe even more, because every year we get more and more protected classes. But they're the type of things that you would think of, like race, sex, disability, religion, national origin, families with children, source of income, those kind of things. And we take complaints based on protected classes, basically in 4 categories. Employment cases. So maybe a typical employment discrimination case might be, I went to get hired for a job, I was visibly pregnant, and I didn't get the job. I feel like I was more qualified than the person who was hired, and I'm going to file a pregnancy discrimination complaint. We also take housing complaints, housing discrimination complaints. So sometimes people might try to apply for a housing opportunity, like a rental opportunity, and they may, the landlord might have been very friendly in person, and when they go and show up, the landlord's like, it's already taken. And they may file the case because of their race and say that they feel like they didn't get that opportunity because of their race. We also take public accommodation complaints. Sometimes those involve schools, sometimes those involve police, inequitable treatment by the police. It could even involve unfair treatment in a store. You go somewhere and you're not served and you believe it's because of your disability. And then we get a spattering of credit transaction cases where people feel like they didn't get mortgages or loans because of a protected class basis. Most of the time, there's 2 theories of discrimination that we deal with. And probably 98% of the cases that we deal with are disparate treatment cases. So I believe that I wasn't treated fairly, and I believe it is because of my protected class. So in the example I gave you of the pregnant person goes to apply for a job, they're visibly pregnant, they don't get the job, and they believe they were treated unfairly because they were pregnant. We also get some disparate impact cases. Many times we'll get these cases in terms of criminal convictions. So a company might have a policy that says we are not going to hire anyone with a felony record. However, we know that people of color are disproportionately arrested and convicted in the criminal justice system. And so occasionally we will get a case that says, I did not get a job because the respondent employer has no felony rule. I am a person of color and I have been disparately impacted by that rule. In other words, it wasn't necessarily against me personally, but the rule itself had an impact on people of color. There's also a third type of discrimination case we occasionally get, which is mixed motive, which could be a combination of disparate impact and disparate treatment. And the reason I mention that is because many of these cases are the environmental injustice cases are likely disparate impact. Although I'm going to give you an example of one in a little bit that is, I believe, you could make a valid disparate treatment case and an example of cases that we've got it. But many times when people are going to plead these cases, they're going to also plead them as disparate impact, maybe mixed motive. And sometimes people would prefer to go to court with those cases. In the housing discrimination cases, they can go right to court. In employment cases, they would need to come to us first. So I think the work surrounding environmental injustice is sometimes peripheral to what we do, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how I think it really does impact the work that we do more directly than people might think. So for the most part, what does the CHRO deal with? And we deal with marginal groups, historically marginal groups, people of color, all sorts of groups that have been discriminated against. But in the environmental context, most typically it's people of color, Black people, Latino people, indigenous communities who are the most affected. And really, I think the interns gave a great definition of what environmental injustice is, but often it's environmental racism. I was reading a news article, I don't remember exactly where it was, but some company was trying to put some big pipeline in a community or a big factory or something of that nature. And they went to a zoning hearing and they said, well, why are you putting it here rather than in other places? They said, because no one here is going to bother to complain. That was pretty specific in terms of their statement of why they picked that neighborhood, because they just assumed that people that were in that neighborhood would not complain about the placement of the new equipment. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the work we do and how the environmental injustice kind of frames the work we do. And the first thing I want to talk about is lead exposure, because that is a case that we get somewhat frequently, and this is how it will come about. A prospective tenant will call up a landlord and say, I'd like to, I see you have an opening in your housing. I'd like to come look at the apartment. And the landlord will say, do you have any children? And the tenant will say, yes, I have a 1-year-old child, a 1-year-old little girl. And the landlord will say either, no, I cannot rent to you, or sometimes specifically will say, I can't rent to you because there's lead in the apartment and it's too expensive to abate the lead. Well, that is actually pretty on point, disparate treatment. I won't rent to you because you have children. The reason I won't rent to you because you have children is because there's lead in the apartment. And the law is pretty clear on an issue like that. The landlord can't not rent to someone without children just because they have lead in the apartment. What they actually have to do is abate the lead, get rid of the lead, because as we know, it's very dangerous for little children to be living in an apartment that has lead in the paint, because what little children do is eat the paint chips, and that can cause a lot of problems for them. I thought I'd just give you a few more examples of how this intersects with housing discrimination. Oftentimes, if there's poor air quality in a unit, or there's cockroaches or rodents, it increases asthma risks for children. There's a lack, often people living in communities are in housing that could be not a lot of place to play and exercise. And I know Erin is probably going to talk to us a little bit about how a lot of public housing has been segregated and a lot of really non-public housing, but back in the day, because of zoning issues and land restrictions and deed restrictions, our housing has ended up being segregated. And lots of times minority people are living in the city where there's less green place, less place to play for kids, less exercise opportunities, and traffic risks. You know, it's more dangerous to live where there's cars all around, sometimes substandard housing conditions. The interns talked about the fact that oftentimes in low-income communities, there is a lack of natural disaster preparedness. And we saw that in Hurricane Katrina. That, I'm sorry, they're saying I'm breaking up, so I'm going to try turning my camera off to see if that would be more helpful. We saw that in Hurricane Katrina, that really there was no plan as to what to do when those levees broke. Often a lack of good jobs, and more likely an opportunity to be exposed to police brutality. And it affects employment situations as well. People who are working manual labor jobs are more likely to have exposure to toxins at work. There's a higher rate of injuries in traditional jobs. And when COVID-19 came, we saw really how minorities were and women were overly impacted by the COVID-19 virus, which was an environmental factor, because they were not in jobs that they were able to work from home like other people were. And they had to choose between keeping their job and taking care of their kids who weren't able to go to school. And lastly, environmental injustice affects our places of public accommodation. Where are their parks? Where are their sports fields? Where is their access to participate in youth sports? And a lot of these issues are really tied into where people live, where their jobs are, where they live, what is around them, all deals with discrimination issues that the CHRO works on. So I just thought I'd give our contact information really quickly, and I'm sure that the interns will also give that at the end of the presentation. That is my entire presentation, and I want to give our experts a chance to really talk more about the issues that I've framed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney Jacobson. And we do have one question in the chat for you. It says, does CHRO only handle complaints from individuals or also from groups?
So we handle complaints from individuals, but sometimes a group of individuals will file a complaint. But typically individuals. We will also take complaints from organizations that have been affected by discrimination. So occasionally we'll have a complaint by like a fair housing organization that has organizational standard, but for the most part, we're taking individual complaints. Oh, one little plug, if people are taking these cases to court and deciding not to file with us, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be a resource for folks. We oftentimes will file amicus briefs and intervene in cases. So if people do have an environmental injustice case that they think the CHRO should be involved in, please give us a call.
Thank you so much, Attorney Jacobson. We are now going to transition to our presentation from Commissioner Edith Pestana.
Hi, I'm here. I don't see it up on screen yet. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and I'll share that for you, Commissioner Pestana.
Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate it. It should go to slide show, right?
We're just having a little loading issues. It should be ready in a sec.
Okay.
We're sorry, we're having some technical issues on our end. We're gonna redo it now. We're gonna try and reshare it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yay. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edith Pastana, and I've been with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection for 30 years. And I'm going to give just a brief history of the movement in the state of Connecticut. May I have the next slide, please? So in 1992, I was actually giving a presentation at an environmental health conference on health disparities. And the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection had staff there that were in the audience. And this had just come out, this National Law Journal study. And so they approached me and with the desire to want to create a committee to start looking at equity within the state of Connecticut. And so the National Law Journal found that there was a racial divide in the way the United States government cleans up toxic waste sites and punishes polluters. White communities see faster action, better results, and stiffer penalties than communities where, you know, people of color live. May I have the next slide, please? And so toxic, I think, is this the next one? Is this the next slide? This is 2, right? Okay, so there's 1, 2. Okay, so so Sophia shared with you the 1987 study, Toxic Waste and Race. And then they redid the study 20 years later and found the same, nothing had changed. That African Americans were more likely or twice as likely than white Americans to live in neighborhoods with air pollution posed the greatest risk to their health, and Hispanic and Asians were more likely to breathe dirty air and live in proximity to chemical industries. So basically nothing changed since the late 80s. And the study was also done again by the Commission on Racial Justice and the United Church of Christ, just so you know. Next slide, please. And so the program was created given these 2 studies. The Connecticut DEP at the time began to meet with a coalition of stakeholders to try and look at how are we going to address this issue in Connecticut. So the NAACP participated. John Britton, a civil rights attorney from UConn Law School, was a member of this coalition. The Connecticut Civil Liberties Union, Hartford Tenants Association, One Chain Inc., which was a neighborhood redevelopment organization in Hartford Northern, the Department of Public Health, that was my role at the time, Aspida, which is a youth organization that was actually out of Bridgeport, and it was led by the late Cesar Batalla. The Migrant Children Health Program, which is charged with ensuring that migrant children of farmers come in and they have health care and go to school and everything that everybody else is deserved to have, and the Hispanic Health Council, so that we all met for a number of months, like I would say 6 months. Can I have the next slide, please? And developed a policy that no segment of the population should, because of its racial, ethnic, or economic status, bear a disproportionate share of the risks and consequences of environmental pollution or be denied equal access to environmental benefits. So this was drafted in December of 1993. Historically, we are the second oldest policy that was developed. The actual oldest is out of Arkansas, which is pretty interesting in itself. Can I have the next slide, please? So when I first started, this is basically what a lot of the neighborhoods look like in your inner cities. Just a dumping ground. Piles and piles of illegal dumping and trash. How disrespectful can you be when you allow something like that and you allow people to come into your community and dump garbage in your neighborhood? Can I have the next slide, please? So, okay. So in 1994, along with, when you're looking at all of this, the Hartford landfill is actually a historic landmark case. It was a nationally recognized environmental justice case. The city of Hartford had opened a landfill on Liebert Road in the North Meadows in 1940. But prior to that, it was an open burning dump. In 1951, the Hartford Fire Department burned shacks erected on the landfill by dump dwellers. I mean, it was just a really horrible place. And between 53 and 77, all waste produced by the city of Hartford was burned in what was then the Hartford incinerator, which has closed last year. But residents of the north end of Hartford complained for years about odors, their cars being parked outside covered with soot, ash. Basically, they couldn't open their windows in the summer. They couldn't have a tenants association meeting in their neighborhood. And they had dealt with this for a very, very long time. They filed a civil rights complaint with the Department of Justice and the US EPA. Can I have the next slide, please? So Larry Charles, I have to give him a shout out because he and Cynthia Jennings, who I think is on this call, pretty much led the charge on the creation of the program and supporting the program and educating the agency staff on what these EJ communities are all about, how they suffer, what their suffering is, with respect to lack of housing, just the odor issues of the landfill, the lack of public transparency and how regulatory agents publish public notice, which was back then just a legal notice in the legal page. No one reads legal notices in the legal page. Nobody. Maybe attorneys do, but not the general public. And he actually came to DEP at the time, and an assembly was brought in, and all the state workers, all the DEP workers went into we have a really large auditorium, and Larry Charles pretty much told them what life was like and what it was about and what justice is. And he passed away in 2018, but he was quite the champion. Al Gore, actually, he worked with Al Gore during the Clinton administration, where they sent him down to South Africa to help on the apartheid issue and environmental issues of South Africa. So very significant historical person in the history of EJ, and I have to give him kudos. Next slide, please. The mother of environmental justice in the state of Connecticut is Cynthia Jennings, and I do think she's on the call. She was the first individual that in the paper coined the term environmental racism in Connecticut. I had been on the job at DEP for a month. And anyway, to make a long story short, I called the Hartford Courant news reporter and begged him to give me her phone number, twisted his arm enough that, and he gave me her phone number so I could contact her and I wanted to listen to her. I wanted to hear from her, and I wanted her to come into our agency and actually change the culture and present what the situation was like where she lived in Hartford Northern. And there's a picture of her in 2023 after the landfill was closed, but it was a really long fight. Next slide, please. And these are, so there you have the mom of EJ, and you also have Dr. Mark Mitchell, who was the creator of the Hartford Environmental Justice Network, also very involved in adjudicatory issues in Connecticut, and actually led the charge to creating the first environmental justice communities law for the state. And you see Cynthia Jennings there. Sharon Lewis, who couldn't make it today, is also in the background. She is the executive director of the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice, an advocacy group that basically has helped, and they were all members of CCEJ. Dr. Mitchell created CCEJ. And then you see the late Gladys Ellis, who was president of the Hartford Senior Congress, a very powerful group of seniors, basically that vote and are very powerful, and pretty much took on the landfill herself. We lost her to COVID, and I just needed to give Gladys a shout out. She was a lovely woman, a brilliant woman, and she is well missed. So these are your basically the parents and the movers and shakers, and they just didn't work in Hartford. I want you to know, they worked nationally on environmental justice issues, and they helped New Haven with their EJ issues, and Waterbury with their EJ issues, and Bridgeport with their EJ issues, and the like. Just a spectacular group of people that need to be applauded, and I feel blessed that I've been able to work with them for the last 30 years. Next slide, please. So thanks to Dr. Mitchell's and Cynthia and Gladys and Sharon Lewis's persistence, after 5 years of knocking on the door of the state legislature in 2009, an act concerning environmental justice communities became law. It defined environmental justice communities. We were the first state to actually define them in the nation. It defined facilities that were covered under the law. It required public participation and public notice, and it required a community benefit agreement if the town and environmental justice community requested it in their specific town. Can I have the next slide, please? And so the law was updated in 2020 to require a CEBA agreement if there are a total of 5 affecting facilities in an environmental justice community. Affecting facilities are those facilities that are large polluters. I don't know how to sugarcoat it. They're your major sources of air pollution, your regional solid waste facilities, your regional sewage treatment plant, and incinerators, for example. So if there's 5 already in an EJ community, you are required by law to negotiate a host community benefit agreement with that community. And it also requires written notice to local and state elected officials, and requires written notification to the neighborhood and the environmental groups in English and the language that's spoken by at least 50% of the population that live within a half mile of the proposed or existing facility. They all have to be notified in writing. Next slide, please. And so this is the environmental justice community map. It's actually on our website. There's a link in the chat if you want to go in, and you can type in an address and you can see if you live in an environmental justice community. And it's basically defined by the red are the Department of Economic and Community Development Distressed Municipalities list. It's a list that they put together using a number of factors that define them, including income, poverty, education, age of housing stock, and a number of other social demographic data that they have. And then we also have block groups, because literally we wanted to make sure that we didn't miss individuals, populations that are literally living on the other side of the tracks, that are living in where the undesirable facilities are located, your waste facilities and whatnot. And that's based on US Census data. 30% of the population is living below the federal poverty level. That would, in that particular block group, you're an EJ community and the law pertains to you, and there has to be that outreach, CEBA agreements, and the like. Next slide, please. So we have an affecting facilities map. So you can go on our website, Connecticut Deep, and you could type in an address and you could look at whether or not you reside in a town and how that's an EJ town, and you can count the number of facilities, affecting facilities that are located in your town. And what the colors represent are different types of facilities, whether they're waste, air, sewage, etc. And again, if there's 5 affecting facilities in that community, you have the right, actually it's mandatory now that you have to negotiate a community environmental benefit agreement, or you're not going to receive a permit from our agency. Next slide, please. I guess it's stuck.
It's loading, sorry.
That's okay. In 2024 now, we have new, actually, that's a typo. It should be 2023. I apologize. The public meetings and the final plan reports are due within 30 days. You have to draft an environmental justice public participation plan if you're applying for a permit in an EJ community and you're an affecting facility. That is required, and that requires significant notification, as you see here. It requires written notice of neighborhoods and environmental groups in English and language spoken by 15% of the population within a half mile. That means that they have to submit all the addresses of individuals that live within a half a mile. That list has to be provided, and all of those individuals and entities receive a written notice inviting them into a public information meeting to learn about this, whether it's an existing facility that's expanding or whether a new facility is coming into their community. And there also is required to have a signage on the property as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So are there environmental risks in Connecticut EJ communities? Are they different? Can I have the next slide, please? So when we first started out, we wanted to see how we measured up with the National Law Journal and Toxic Waste Erased, and we looked at the data and we saw that you're looking at plants that emit criteria air pollution. So basically those are your low air pollution. And then when you look at the tracks on the side, it shows percentage of minorities that live in those areas. And you'll see that it clusters in the darker areas. And we realized that, and that was one of the things we took into account when we drafted the law, as well as some other towns that, they may be more affluent, but the undesirable facilities are in those block groups. Have the next slide, please. So there was a very large planning process that occurred during the COVID period, starting in 2020, under the Governor's Council on Climate Change, where there were 7 work groups that were created, including an equity and environmental justice working group, which I was the staff lead on, to look at climate change and look at climate change through different factors, whether it's resilience, mitigation, natural resources, and the like, and to look at it all through an equity lens. Everything that you do, is it equitable? And one of the recommendations that came out of this Governor's Council on Climate Change, and recommendations had to be drafted and submitted to the governors, was the creation of an environmental justice mapping tool. A mapping tool that the public could use to look up their address and get a sense of what is located in my community. So you can go into it. It's on the, we developed it in partnership with UConn's Center for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. They're out of Avery Point. They took on the challenge. It took 2 years to create, and it has basically 50 separate indicators of different pollution types. It includes, of course, sensitive populations. I know that Kim spoke about you know, elevated lead levels. It looks at disease mortality rates. It looks at asthma emergency department rates, low birth weight, declined mental health, EPA cancer risk, and EPA respiratory. It also looks at different socioeconomic factors like housing burden, linguistic isolation, income, lack of health insurance, living in a rent-owned ownership building, right? Puts you at a higher risk. Multi-unit housing, lack of transportation, single parents, and food insecurity, which was mentioned earlier. When you're looking at pollution burden, we mapped at least 50 indicators of potential pollution sources, including brownfield sites, Superfund sites, incinerators, landfills. Housing lead risk was added to it, municipal transfer stations, recycling facilities, underground storage tanks, hazardous chemicals, wastewater, and other air pollutions that were really important to people included diesel emissions from traffics, noise, particulate matter, and major sources of air pollution and toxic releases. So it's all on there. And when you go on there, you could type in your address and you'll get a risk score on the side from 1 to 10. Basically, the darker the area, the bluer the area, the darker the blue area indicates that there are a lot of conditions in there for both pollution burden and sensitive populations that puts you at a higher risk for disease and the like. And so, and it's available for the public for you to use. There's lots of data on it. It was created also for people to be able to take this data and use it both when there's planning and zoning issues, when a new facility is coming in, they can use it for healthier places to locate public housing and the like. And there's also a lot of data on it for people that are people putting together grants that is quite useful as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Here again is what I was talking about earlier. All the different data that's on there, and it says draft because it's a living tool, and the tool was taken out on the road, meaning we went to Bridgeport with Yukon Circa. Yaprak Onat was the lead investigator, and the like. And we went to Bridgeport to an NRZ meeting. We went to La Junta for Progressive Action. We went to Latino Progress in Hartford. We went to the city of Groton and presented there. Basically, we went around and showed them, these are the indicators that we're looking at. Does this describe your community? Do we have everything that you consider in your community of relevance to your health and to the environment? And then this is basically the summary of everything that was collected, and that data is there. And if there's other indicators that the audience is interested in adding, that's something that could be considered as well if the data is available. Can I have the next slide, please? And so these are the different links that I provided for you, which also includes like Desegregate Connecticut. One of the things that maybe Aaron's going to talk about is the redlining of communities in Connecticut, which has contributed to the environmentally burdened areas. They are located in areas where people basically were forced to live. They really couldn't buy houses, or the policies were to not allow them to live in certain areas of Connecticut. You can look at some of the atlases and some of the maps in Desegregate Connecticut. That organization is trying very hard in the legislature to pass zoning law reform. Another one is The Color of Law, which is the forgotten history of how our government segregated America. And then a portal for looking at EJ communities and the like. Thank you for your time and for inviting me to participate in this symposium. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Pestana. We appreciate you for taking your time. And then it looks like we had a question for you.
Yes, I had a question about one of the photos you showed. It showed a picture of a large accumulation of garbage. I was just wondering where that photo was from, if that's in Connecticut, if that's a specific city.
It was. That was in I'm going to say it was 1995, and it was in Bridgeport. But it doesn't look like that anymore. It was cleaned up. In 1 year, we organized the EJ program there were 3 of us, Jacqueline Purnell Holiday, and Doris Johnson, who's still our outreach coordinator. Jacqueline Purnell Holiday was really tasked with enforcement. What she did was she went out and she filmed these communities and took photographs of all these piles of garbage. Basically, there was flight. Everybody moved out of the cities. And what happened was that illegal dumpers, which don't live in the city, would come in and just throw trash. So between that and empty buildings, which were demoed, which is awful, it made people in the communities, I mean, because I spoke to them, say, somebody just knocked the teeth out of my neighborhood, right? So they would use these empty lots and just pile trash on them. And in 1 year, we cleaned up with the assistance of the public works departments in the cities, your major cities, as long as with alternatives to incarceration, individuals that are doing community service. They actually enjoyed helping to clean up the communities that they had come from in the process and make them feel really good. And 1 year there were 1,500 sites that were cleaned. And garbage, I can't tell you the amount of tons that it was. And after the fact, we would request the local public works to lay the properties out with wood chips, just like cover it in a blanket of wood chips. And after that, you would see people actually coming out and saying, oh, wow, somebody actually cares for our neighborhood. Somebody actually cares about us. And they started going out and they started sweeping their stoop, putting flowers out because somebody cared. In some of those areas, some of those sites were also, if the city was interested and the community wanted it, pocket parks were created as well, to give people green space and with benches and the like. So that was done actually in the 90s. But now people are moving back into the cities. There's a lot of building. There's a housing shortage, right? So there's a lot more energy in the cities now and people are moving in. As it was in the 90s, it was really pretty, it was really pretty devastating personally to me anyway, and the people that lived there.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Commissioner Pestana. I see that we do have other questions in the chat, but we are going to leave those for the Q&A section so that we have enough time to hear from all of our panelists. So without further ado, we will now transition to hearing from Erin Boggs.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm going to put up a presentation, so just give me 1 second. All right, it's great to be here, and I just want to make sure, are you seeing this in presenter view or seeing it in the before the screen is shared correctly?
We see it perfectly, just like it's being presented.
Great. All right, well, it's great to be here, and thanks to all the folks at CHRO and the interns who organized this, and the previous presenters. It's been great framing for all of this work. Before I get going into this too far, I just want to recognize my colleague, Victoria Oswald, who's OCA's policy and data analyst, who did most of the data crunching and maps for this presentation and will be available to answer questions along with me. For those of you who don't know Open Communities Alliance, we are a statewide civil rights organization that's really focused on addressing and unwinding segregation and its impact. We also do lots of work on zoning in particular, along with issues about where subsidized housing is placed, where vouchers are located, and affirmatively furthering fair housing more generally. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, which is talking about disparate impact, because Kim already talked about the protected classes in Connecticut and the notion of disparate impact. But the general idea here is if you have a policy that is harming members of a protected class at a higher rate than other people, then you may have fair housing concerns, and you certainly will have social justice concerns. So as we look at the data available on environmental justice, that's kind of the framework that we're considering. And of course, part of the legacy of segregation is about disinvestment and sort of policies in higher poverty, often communities of color that may have been disempowered in various ways historically. And then the other piece of it, the sort of flip side of the coin, is barriers to accessing places that may have more resources. So we are really focused on both parts of that. And what we've done, and our presentation will be pretty quick, is to look at some of the kinds of data that Edith just presented and map it with some other things and say, okay, are we at a point with this particular indicator where we need to start to be concerned? So the indicators that we chose just sort of as a test run are tree canopy cover. Tree canopy cover ends up being very important in a lot of different ways. It improves air quality, it reduces temperatures, it assists with respiration, breathing. We looked at particulate matter 2.5, which is really just fine particle air pollution, and it is associated with asthma, low birth weight, heart disease. And then both of those things can actually be connected to asthma. So we just looked at asthma rates across the state. But there are many, many other things that the tool that Edith shared has, and it's just a fantastic resource for all of us because we finally have that information all together. We mapped these things with racial demographics, with the location of housing investments made by the federal government's low-income housing tax credit program, which is the federal government's biggest investment program to create and rehab housing that is affordable. Just to give it some context, about a third of the housing units in the country that have been built and rehabilitated over, I think it's the last 20 years, were invested in by this program. So it's huge, huge, huge program. We also looked at the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and also known as Section 8. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, it's a program where individuals who are below a certain income, usually 50% of median income, and most recipients are at about 25% of median income, are given vouchers that cover the rent up to a cap above a third of the recipient's income. So the recipient is expected to pay a third of their income. The program pays the rent up to a cap, and that cap is potentially one of the problems. We know it's one of the problems because it cannot allow access to neighborhoods that have more resources and sort of better sometimes environmental conditions. So here's what we found. With tree canopy cover, the map in blue, the darker the blue area, the higher the percentage of people of color. And then on the tree canopy cover, the darker the green, the more tree canopy cover there is. So we looked at areas that have the 20% least tree canopy cover, and just looked at where people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds are living. So Places in that worst 20% for tree canopy cover are where 38% of Hispanics are living, 39% of Blacks are living, and only 8% of whites. So seems to be kind of a concern here because there's a real disparate number there by race and ethnicity. So we also looked at tree canopy cover for the two programs I talked about, the low-income housing tax credit program and the voucher program. So with low-income housing tax credits, more than half of them are in those areas with the worst 20% of tree canopy cover. 50% of housing choice vouchers are in the same areas, but only 17% of all housing units are in those areas. So again, this seems like something to be worried about. With particulate matter, so this is that fine particle air pollution, we have that in places that are at the sort of worst 20% for this kind of pollution, it's where basically a quarter of Hispanics are living, over a third of Blacks, and only 15% of whites. So again, we see something that should call our attention to this, and we should really be thinking about it. With the tax credit development, only 34% of the tax credits are in these areas. And this is something we just want to dig into a little bit more because that surprised us, but this is why we have this data, is to uncover the patterns that we see and better understand them. 41% of housing choice vouchers, but only 21% of all housing units. So there's the vouchers. And then with severe asthma, again, the map with the blue is where people of color are living. The map in orange is where we have the more severe rates of asthma. And for this, we just looked at the places where we saw the top 10% worse incidence of asthma. This is with emergency department visits. That's how it's measured. And we see that 52% of Hispanics are in that worst 10% area of the state, 58% of Blacks, and 16% of whites. So again, very, very concerning with these numbers. It's something lots of advocates have been working on for a very long time in Connecticut, and for good reason. So we need to be concerned about that. And then in terms of severe asthma and tax credits, it's where 62% of the tax credit developments are going, 54% of housing choice vouchers, and only 35% of all units. So one of the things we're thinking about here is not only can housing that is funded by the government be placed in a balanced way across the state, but if it is placed in an area that raises environmental justice concerns, shouldn't that happen along with other investments that are going to remediate that concern? Or maybe the remediation should be happening before the housing investments go in. So as we think about environmental justice in housing, these are the kinds of things that we look at. And it sounds like we're saving questions for the end, but if you have particular questions about like where the data is coming from and how the mapping was done, Victoria can answer that when we get to that time in the program. So thank you.
Ms. Boggs, for your presentation. It was very informative. And now we would like to call on Professor Bontley to deliver his presentation.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay, I believe that was not the way I thought it would share. Hold on, maybe I've got the wrong setting here.
We can see your screen and the presentation. It's clear.
It is clear. Are you seeing all the tools at the bottom as well?
Yes, we do see the tools.
Okay, let me try this again. Those don't need to be there.
We can see it now.
Same thing. Sorry.
You can just leave them. It's fine. We can see the presentation.
Okay, that was not what I was hoping to do. All the stuff on the side you don't need, just my notes. Thank you so much, though, for inviting me and for putting together such a terrific symposium on such an important topic. I'm honored to be a part of it. As a philosophy professor, most of my engagement with this topic is, well, academic. I'm mainly engaged in scholarship and teaching. So I had originally planned to say something about the scholarship on environmental justice and on the theory that informs it. But then it occurred to me that nobody really wants to hear a philosophy lecture, especially not on a beautiful summer day. So instead, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the research and teaching initiatives and engaged scholarship that's going on at my institution at the University of Connecticut. And hopefully you can get an idea of some of the ways that UConn faculty can contribute to this important work and partner with communities and activists in the state. So let's see. We've already talked about environmental injustice. I find this to be a useful definition when I'm introducing the concept in class. From Kristen Schrader-Frichette's 2002 book, environmental injustice occurs whenever some individual or group bears disproportionate environmental risks, or has unequal access to environmental goods, or has less opportunity to participate in environmental decision-making. And as she goes on to say, citing the work of, for instance, Robert Bullard and many others, in every nation of the world, poor people and minorities, communities of color, indigenous communities, and so on face greater environmental risks, have less access to environmental goods, and have less ability to control the environmental insults imposed upon them. As other speakers have pointed to here, this pattern, it isn't just environmental justice, it seems to be environmental racism. But you don't have to take it from me. This was found by Donald Trump's own EPA as it was busy trying to shut down some of these initiatives. The EPA published a report concluding that environmental racism is indeed real and that much of the disproportionate effect is based on race. Now, as the commissioner and other speakers have described, the environmental justice movement and the attendant body of research really grew out of local civil rights organizations, fighting the effects of relatively localized sources of pollution on particular communities, like, for instance, the landfill in Hartford's North End. So that is the basis for a lot of this work. One of the big developments recently in the academic literature, however, on environmental justice, one of the big developments is the growing focus on global environmental injustice, especially climate change, and especially the ways in which the global issue intersects with local sources of injustice. Now, many people, probably not people on this call, but many people, when they first hear of climate change as an issue of social justice, they're rather surprised. They think, isn't it a scientific problem, a technical or engineering problem? Doesn't it affect everyone? And aren't all of us to blame? Well, yes and no. It's a global threat, but those who are most vulnerable to that threat have made basically no contribution to the problem. As this is the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Melis Zenawi puts it, the injustice of the whole issue of global warming and climate change lies in the fact that those who have contributed nothing to its genesis will suffer the most from its consequences. This is easy to illustrate with some rather intriguing maps that are, these aren't mapping tools developed by UConn. We'll come back to those in a minute. But these are demonstrate in very vivid terms the ways in which this global injustice occurs. This map sort of shows you the proportion of emissions of climate warming, planet warming, carbon CO2 emissions that have come from different countries, and sizes the countries according to their emissions footprint. And of course, you see the United States is massively blown up, as is Germany and much of Europe, whereas Africa and South America and shrink to almost nothing. India is shrinks, Oceania practically disappears. So that's where the emissions come from. But then if you map out where people are most vulnerable to the effects, to flooding, to heat waves, etc., you get exactly the opposite pattern, right? You get massive vulnerability in Africa and Asia, especially Southeast Asia, and very little in Europe and North America. Similarly, for poverty rates, right? The number of people living on less than $1.25 a day is correlated with those people being vulnerable and at risk. The map shows something else that's kind of interesting too. Notice that the biggest contributors and those least at risk tend to be European nations and or their settled colonies, such as the United States. The most vulnerable countries are the former colonies. Is that a coincidence? I think not. The European colonial system resulted in a massive transfer of wealth from the colonies to what they describe as the colonial core, which originally just included European countries, but now you could include the United States in that. That's why Europeans started adventuring overseas in the first place, to find riches, to prop up their bloated bureaucracies and aristocracies, and fund the Europe's constant warfare. So this drove European colonial expansion, which is what created this pattern. Anyway, I mention this because one of the important developments in the academic literature these days is the recognition that the roots of environmental justice, both global and local, in local communities in the United States and other countries, the roots of environmental justice lie in colonialism, in the colonial past. There was a long debate for a while about whether environmental justice was about race or whether it's about economics, but that's a false dichotomy. Both race and economics are rooted in the colonial past. And the people who suffer environmental injustices are almost always members of communities which one way or another were subjected to colonial oppressions. So understanding that colonialism is the root of environmental justice is one of the important theoretical developments that I wanted to mention. As I said, a lot of the focus is on the intersection between global and local. I believe it was the commissioner mentioned Hurricane Katrina and the destruction of much of the parts of New Orleans that are populated by environmental justice communities. As the former chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put it, it's the poorest of the poor of the world, and this includes poor people even in prosperous societies, who are going to be hit the worst. Well, that's what he said years ago. I think that quote is from 25 years ago. They are being hit the worst in this country and others. So I'm going to skip the next slide, just more stuff about the distribution of wealth and how it affects emissions. And I'm going to cut ahead, if that's okay, to talk a little bit about some of the work on environmental justice that's going on right now at UConn, some of which has already been mentioned, so I won't dwell on those parts. But you might initially be skeptical. You might wonder what academics can possibly do about environmental justice from their ivory towers. Not that there are ivory towers at UConn, it's mainly brick, and there aren't a lot of towers either, but you get the point. Academics typically aren't in an activist space, but they do work that informs activists. They do work which teaches and educates a new generation of people who will take the lead on these problems. So I think there's a lot that academics can contribute to working on these problems. One of the big contributions from UConn has already been mentioned. The commissioner mentioned the Connecticut Environmental Justice Mapping Tool, which was developed by the State Department of Environmental Energy and Environmental Protection in conjunction with UConn's CIRCA, the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. She's already talked about this and all the data and all the process that went into it, so I won't spend any more time on it right now. Let me cut to a few more things that may be less familiar. One locus of outreach and work on this is UConn's Office of Sustainability, which was initially set up as an office to deal with sort of environmental sustainability of the campus, but really has a much larger mission now. For instance, it employs a great number of students as interns who work both on campus and in communities on projects they've developed. For instance, an environmental justice education tool, which you can find on their website. And the Office of Sustainability also manages a program called UConn at COP, which gives undergraduate students an opportunity and a support to attend the annual international climate negotiations, which are going on, and where it is absolutely vital for people from traditionally marginalized communities to have a voice. And so that's one of the reasons why academic institutions send people there, not just so that they can learn, but so that they can also lend their voice on the issues that are being negotiated on the international stage. So UConn has been sending a coalition, mainly students, a few faculty members there for years. That's a picture from a COP a couple of years ago with the world's most famous climate activist. Another thing I should mention and highlight is the program called eCore, which is run out of UConn's extension program in conjunction with the College of Engineering. eCore is a program which marries, it was created to provide assistance to communities in Connecticut while also providing undergraduates with real world experience and workforce training. So it has courses on 3 different things: on brownfield redevelopment, on climate resilience, and on stormwater management, all of those being very important issues for Connecticut communities. The courses are 2-semester sequences, so the students spend a semester in the classroom learning about the issue and tools to address it, and then basically a semester of practicum working in the communities on projects to address these problems. It's been tremendously popular with our students and with our community partners. Unfortunately, this was a grant-funded initiative and the funding is running out, so we're looking right now for ways to continue this because it's been such a successful program. I would hate to see it disappear. Let me also mention quickly the environmental programs, majors, minors, graduate programs, et cetera, that UConn has, which are educating large numbers of students, many of whom are preparing to go to work in for environmental or social justice organizations, nonprofits, and so on. So I'm the director of the Environmental Studies program, which is really focused on environment, human environment, society interactions, and draws on work from political science, philosophy, sociology, anthropology, geography, English, journalism, so a wide range of departments. There's also an environmental science program, which focuses more on the sort of biophysical side. And the students in both of these programs, we graduate between the two programs, I don't know, maybe 70 or so a year, are all preparing to address the sorts of problems that we're talking about at different levels and in different ways. And then finally, let me just mention a couple of my faculty colleagues and the work that they're doing on environmental justice in different ways. This is just a small sample of a much larger pool, but people who I know and whose work I know fairly well. Starting in the upper left, Professor Carol Atkinson Palumbo, who's a geographer. She studies the policy impacts and policies that are designed to support sustainable cities. There being a big program on sustainable urban communities and cities at UConn, run out of the Hartford campus primarily. She studies, for instance, transit policy, water policy, finance, and the effects that these have on sustainability. Below her, my colleague Phoebe Godfrey in sociology. She studies the just sustainability and the ways in which environmental injustice intersects with other sorts of identities, indigenous, gender identities. While not, she will tell you, not an indigenous person herself, she's very interested in applying indigenous learning and bringing the sort of theory into practice, into making sure that our practices are sustainable and not just academic work. In the upper right, Cesar Abadia Barrero is an anthropologist. Actually, he's a dentist by training originally, but then he went into anthropology. He studies the effects of capitalism, neoliberal, market-oriented reforms on healthcare systems and on the environments that surround them, and especially on children who rely on those healthcare systems. And then in the lower right, my colleague Akshan Bayogan, who's the department head of political science. She studies sort of political economy of energy transitions from fossil fuels to clean energy, for instance, and all of the political and economic ramifications of that. Also, the relationship to democracy and community development. That's a quick introduction. Let me mention just two more folks who I work with. Joe McDougald at the law school, who's the executive director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Law. He works on policy responses to climate change, sea level rise, and of course, sea level rise is a huge issue for Connecticut communities. Of course, many of the communities on the shoreline are quite wealthy. The wealthy communities have more resources to respond, but it's also an issue for many of the environmental justice communities as well. And then on the right, Professor Angie Seth, she's the department head of it's not geography anymore, it's now called the Department of Geography, Sustainability, Community, and Urban Studies. That brings together several different programs. She's a climate modeler by training who, for most of her career, studied regional variation in precipitation patterns and how those will change with climate change and how those will affect local communities. But what she's really interested in now is this idea of a just transition. The world and this country, this state, all need to transition to a new energy system and a new energy economy. We cannot keep on the course of burning fossil fuels, and that transition has to happen extremely rapidly. One of the problems when you have a rapid transition, or any transition, is that it is often exploited by the elites to further enrich themselves, to further entrench their power. And so there is a large outcry at the UN and elsewhere to try to ensure that the transition, which has to occur globally but has to start in the wealthy nations, ensure that the transition is just. So we just formed a new research center on just innovation and climate equity, which is going to be investigating the social conditions for a just transition to a new post-carbon economy. The plan is to partner with local communities in Connecticut and at the same time build up a global network of experts and bring these people together to try to support a just transition to a new energy system here in Connecticut and beyond. The program's so new it doesn't even have a website yet. We just got funding for this recently. So that's a bit about the work that's going on at UConn related to environmental justice. There's a lot, if I had more time, there's a lot more I could bring to your attention, but I should stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your amazing presentation. We are running short on time, so we're just going to open up to questions from the public. So please type them in the chat and we will ask them to the panelists. Thank you.
If anyone has any questions to ask the panelists, please put them in the chat.
I think someone asked about they were an employee of a public school in Stanford suspected of a black mold in the building where she works was affected with her asthma. Would she file a complaint with the CHRO, DEEP, the Stanford BOA, or some other agency?
Hello, can I respond?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Edith.
Unless somebody else was going to respond. You actually need to contact the Stanford Health Department and have their director of environmental health come out and inspect your school.
You probably also, if you are reacting to something in the environment at work, want to ask for a reasonable accommodation to not be near that reactive ingredient. So that might be something that someone would want to probably either talk to a lawyer or give us a call about, but sometimes there's things in your workplace or your home that you could be allergic to that other people might not have that same allergen to, and you can get a reasonable accommodation, perhaps. That might be an option.
We have another great question from the chat. How can Connecticut address the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on low-income communities and communities of color, and what equitable policies can be implemented to ensure these communities have equal access to clean air, water, and green spaces?
I'm happy to take a first crack at that. I think we really need to do two things. We need to continue and increase deep investments to remediate all of the environmental hazards that we are aware of. We need to keep coming up with the data so we can really clearly identify it. And we also need to stop putting, and there's movement in this direction. We are seeing some progress on the part of the state of Connecticut, but we need to stop putting subsidized housing and affordable housing almost exclusively in neighborhoods that have higher environmental justice concerns. And break down the barriers that we have to areas where we have very strong environmental characteristics. And one of the key ways we can do that is reforming zoning in the state.
I will also share with you that the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is embarking on strengthening the environmental justice community statute to include a cumulative risk analysis with every permitting application that comes in, similar to the state of New Jersey, which requires an applicant, like let's say whether it's an existing facility or a new facility, the applicant needs to, they have their own, New Jersey created their own tool where the app, you as a permit applicant can go in and start comparing what the health indicator risks are for the community that you're in compared to an average. And they are required to present that information to the neighborhood and the community when they're applying for it. And then the state of New Jersey has developed a model of risks, acceptable risk, right? Depending on how high the asthma rate is or whatnot. If it's very high, or it looks like it's going to contribute to an already disproportionately burdened community, they can deny the permit. And that's what we're going to aim for. We're in the process of reviewing. We're going to hire, actually the request for proposal just went out to identify a person to do risk analysis for us and develop the tool, which we will later include in the regulations, which the agency is moving forward on drafting and able to actually do that, to say what New Jersey did, which is enough is enough. Show some compassion, and that's exactly what they said. That's how they testified in front of their legislators. And when I'm looking at all of you here, you all have a role too. And when our agency comes up and presents it to the legislature and wants this language adopted and this tool adopted, to say no, we need all your backup, as much as your backup as possible. Just had to put it out there. That includes academia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have a question wondering if there are existing discussion circles for the public to explore CTEJ maps or dive into concepts of climate/EJ from an education and outreach perspective.
Can you repeat the question? I think we might have missed some of it.
Yes. So wondering if there are existing discussion circles for the public to explore CTEJ maps or dive into concepts of climate/EJ from an education or outreach perspective.
I can take a stab at that, or at least start. UConn has many outreach and organizes a great many forums, not just in stores, of course, but UConn has a statewide footprint with campuses in many different parts of the state. So it has fairly regular forums in Hartford, and those probably need to be better publicized. But there are events taking place around education there. In local communities, I'm less familiar with what discussion groups there are, but the data and the ideas are readily available. So everything at UConn pretty much is public. You can use the Environmental Justice Toolkit on the Office of Sustainability's website. You can use the Connecticut Environmental Justice Mapping Tool. I think in order to get the commissioner can correct me if I'm wrong, I think in order to get access to some of the data, you need to contact CIRCA or DEEP, but you can use the mapping tool anytime you want. I was using it last night, just exploring some of the amazing things that we have at our fingertips now. The other universities in the New Haven area, there are so many universities, all of which have some connection to environmental justice through their law schools or for instance, the Yale School of the Environment. Much of that stuff is public as well, even though Yale's private, of course. They host a great many public forums. Those are some of the things that come to mind immediately. I'm sure that as soon as I stop talking, I'll think of something else.
I mean, you can always start your own group. You can start your own circle and invite the Circa folks from UConn to attend. I'm more than willing to attend. I mean, I would say a number of communities in Connecticut have these discussions. One that comes to mind most predominantly is New Haven, who has had a climate organization that meets regularly. And I don't know if Kathy Fay is here and she can add to it from New Haven. I thought I saw her name. But certainly I can I'm going to put my email in the chat. Email me and we can start something here. And I can at least connect you with folks that are doing this kind of work.
I was going to put my email in the chat too, but for some reason it won't allow me to. You can find me on the UConn. If you just look me up at UConn directory, you'll get my email address there. The other thing I was going to mention, besides things going on in the cities, where of course environmental justice is most directly a concern to the largest number of people, there are also a lot of forums outside of this. For instance, I gave a talk a couple of years ago at the Glastonbury Land Heritage, I forget exactly the entire title, but they were having speakers on environmental justice and climate justice on a regular basis. They also hold bird walks and things like that in Glastonbury. I think these things are going on in many places because Connecticut has so many active land trusts. So that might be another place to look.
There are also a lot of neighborhood groups that are dealing with excessive flooding, and they are in EJ communities. Hartford has been devastated by flooding. Bridgeport is another community that has severe flooding. And they're always looking for advocates to assist them in moving things along and getting government to move a little faster. So your energy, I'm sure, would be welcomed in many places, and your interest.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. That was very insightful. My name is Chigozie DK. I'm also a college age intern here at CHRO. And for our last question, we have another question here in the chat, and it says, beyond Passport to the Parks and Park Connect, is there anything DEEP is doing to provide greater access to outdoor recreation facilities?
Oh, that's a really, I have to sigh because the agency has been trying. I know that with the governor's assistance, they've provided busing in the past from point A to point B to bring people from like the cities into, like, for instance, a state park. Because if you don't really have a car, it's not accessible. You can't you can't really take a train to Hammonasset or Rocky Hill or Squanch Pond or some other beautiful parks that we have. We know that it's a problem and we're trying to address it. They actually hired an individual, Joseph Dickerson, to kind of work on it and see what we could do. Because really what you need is transit, right? I grew up in New Jersey. I could take a bus anywhere. And that's kind of what needs to happen here. There is transportation inequity. So I share your frustration.
Might I add on that question? It isn't just the state, of course. The state has control of state facilities, but the cities need to be a part of the answer too. And the cities, I know, are always struggling with their budgets, partly because the state generally does not fully fund the pilot program, the payment in lieu of taxes program, which helps make up the big hole that's left by the fact that lots of the most important property in the cities are tax exempt. So for instance, the most valuable property in New Haven is all tax exempt because it's Yale. And the same is true in Hartford, of course, and many other places. So fully funding the cities and supporting their budgets would help tremendously. I heard recently that New Haven has 5 or 6 public pools, all but one of which are closed this summer due to insufficient money to repair them. I don't know the details, but I think that the cities have to be part of the solution and the legislature too. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. And that looks like that is everything that we have time for, as we only have 2 minutes left of the symposium. So again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. A round of applause to all of you. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to attend as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
If you'd like to stay connected with the CHRO for more updates, feel free to check out our website or social medias. Thank you.
Thanks again to the interns for putting this together. That was terrific. Much
It was
appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
Really great work.
And this is all gonna be posted, right, on the CHRO website, because people are asking for Erin's incredible slides.
It'll all be posted, I believe.
Yes, we will post the presentations and the like video of the meeting.
Yes, and I should say they're Victoria Osfog's tremendous maps. So want to give Victoria some credit.
Somebody asked how they could get in touch with me. I was going to.
I'd just like to say thank you all for your contributions. And to Edith's point, we do need to work together and support each other through the legislative session. So let's make that happen. Let's get together and work on a strategy. Okay?
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job,
Thank you.
interns.
Thank you,
Great
everyone.
job.
Thank you for running over.
In answer to the question that was in the chat, if anybody's trying to get in touch with me, feel free to give them my UConn.edu email address, which you all contacted me at. So I was going to put it in the chat, but was not able to do so. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm going to sign off. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you so
to
much,
all.
Professor Bontley.
It was my pleasure. Great event.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, interns. You did an amazing job, and I'm so proud of you. It was so amazing to watch all of this and to hear input of the experts and to see you all shine. It was so good. You guys did such an amazing job. Bravo, bravo, bravo. You're on your way to being leaders all across this country in everything that you do. So keep it up.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, you guys have a good day as well, you ladies and guys. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone.